They don't. I don't know where you're listening from. Maybe you're caring for a child that isn't yours, setting a dinner table where you'll never sit as family, or waiting for someone to finally say thank you. It doesn't matter what time it is, but I promise, today's story will touch your heart in ways you never expected. Destiny Martinez stood in the marble-floored foyer of the Williams Mansion on Chicago's Gold Coast, her weathered hands smoothing down her simple navy dress. The morning light filtered through towering windows, casting long shadows across Persian rugs worth more than most people's annual salaries. At 42, her face carried the gentle lines of someone who had smiled through more pain than most could imagine. Her dark hair, streaked with premature silver, was pulled back in a neat bun that had become her signature, practical, humble, invisible. The scent of fresh coffee drifted from the kitchen where she'd already prepared breakfast for the Williams family. 2 plates of perfectly arranged fruit, organic yogurt, and gluten-free toast awaited 7-year-old Grace and 10-year-old Liam. Their father, Charles Williams, had already left for his investment firm downtown, his Armani suit carrying the faint cologne that lingered in hallways long after he'd gone. The man rarely spoke to Destiny beyond necessary instructions, treating her with the same distant politeness he reserved for the mailman or dry cleaner. But in this house where marble gleamed and chandeliers sparkled, where stock portfolios grew by millions and cryptocurrency investments flourished like digital gardens, there was an emptiness that no amount of wealth could fill. It was the silence of a family that had forgotten how to be tender with each other, how to sit together without checking phones, how to laugh without it echoing hollow through rooms too large for the love they contained. Destiny's own apartment was a 30-minute bus ride away, in Pilsen, where the smell of fresh tortillas mixed with car exhaust and children's laughter spilled from fire escapes. There, in a cramped 2-bedroom space above a corner grocery, she lived with her 16-year-old son, Micah, a boy whose quiet strength reminded her daily of the man she'd once loved and lost. They shared a life built on clearance rack groceries and library books, where every dollar was counted twice and heating bills determined whether they'd have cable that month. The sound of small feet padding down the grand staircase pulled her from her thoughts. Grace appeared first, her golden hair tangled from sleep, dragging a stuffed elephant that had seen better days. Behind her came Liam, already dressed but wearing mismatched socks, a detail their father would never notice but which made Destiny's heart ache with protective tenderness. "Morning, Miss Destiny," Grace whispered, wrapping her thin arms around Destiny's waist. The hug was fierce, desperate in the way only children can be when they sense the adults around them are made of ice. "Good morning, sweet girl," Destiny murmured, her voice carrying the warmth that had been missing from this house since Mrs. Williams had passed 3 years ago. She knelt to Grace's level, gently brushing the tangles from her hair. "Did you sleep well?" Grace shook her head. "I had the nightmare again, the one where everyone leaves." Destiny's chest tightened. She pulled Grace closer, inhaling the scent of strawberry shampoo and childhood innocence. "Nobody's leaving, mija. I'm right here." But even as she spoke the words, Destiny felt their fragility. She was, after all, just an employee in this house. Her contract could be terminated with 2 weeks' notice. Her presence here existed at the mercy of a man who saw her as a line item in his household budget, somewhere between landscaping and security system maintenance. Liam approached more cautiously, his dark eyes, so much like his father's, holding a wariness that broke Destiny's heart. At 10, he already carried the weight of being the man of the house, a burden no child should bear. "Dad left his breakfast again," Liam said quietly. "Should I take it to his office?" "We'll save it for when he comes home," Destiny replied, though they all knew Charles Williams rarely came home before the children were asleep. His world revolved around quarterly earnings reports, merger negotiations, and the constant buzz of his Bloomberg terminal. The children were fed, clothed, and housed. What more could they need from a father whose net worth exceeded $50 million? As she guided them to the breakfast nook, Destiny caught her reflection in the hallway mirror. When had those lines appeared around her eyes? When had her shoulders begun to curve inward, as if protecting her heart from invisible blows? She thought of the photograph tucked in her bedroom drawer, a picture of herself at 25, holding her infant daughter, Elena. The baby who had lived only 3 months before, whooping cough stole her away, leaving Destiny's arms empty and her heart shattered. That loss had driven her to caregiving, as if loving other people's children could somehow fill the void Elena had left behind. For 17 years, she had worked in homes across Chicago, caring for families who appreciated her dedication but never truly saw her. She was furniture that cooked and cleaned and loved, essential but invisible. The Williams house was her 7th placement and by far the wealthiest. The children's trust funds contained more money than entire neighborhoods in her hometown of Guadalajara would see in generations. Their casual discussions of spring break trips to Europe or summer camps that cost more than her annual salary served as constant reminders of the canyon between their worlds. Yet, watching Grace carefully cut her toast into perfect squares, the same way Destiny had taught her, she felt that familiar surge of protective love. These children weren't rich or poor to her. They were simply souls in need of nurturing. Grace, with her sensitive heart and fear of abandonment. Liam, with his quiet intelligence and crushing need to be the perfect son his father seemed to require. "Miss Destiny?" Grace's voice was small. "Will you braid my hair like you did yesterday? Sarah at school said it looked like a princess." "Of course, baby girl." Destiny's fingers worked gently through Grace's hair, creating the intricate pattern she'd learned from her own grandmother decades ago. Each twist and turn was a prayer, a small act of love in a house where affection was rationed like vintage wine. Through the window, she could see Charles's Tesla pulling out of the circular driveway. Another day, another absence. The man who could buy and sell companies with a phone call couldn't spare 5 minutes to see his daughter's smile or hear his son's dreams about becoming a marine biologist. But Destiny would be here. She would witness Grace's first loose tooth and celebrate Liam's science fair victory. She would be the one to wipe tears, bandage scraped knees, and whisper bedtime stories that made the darkness less frightening. She would love these children with the fierce devotion of a mother, even knowing she would never receive that title, never be thanked at their graduations or remembered in their wedding toasts. As the morning sun climbed higher over Lake Michigan, casting gold across the mansion's pristine rooms, Destiny began another day of invisible love, the kind that holds families together from the shadows, unrecognized but absolutely essential. The call came on a Tuesday morning in March, when the last snow of winter clung stubbornly to the mansion's manicured gardens. Destiny was helping Grace with her math homework at the kitchen island when her phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice that greeted her was hauntingly familiar. "Destiny? This is Margaret Sinclair. I worked with you at the Henderson house, remember?" Of course she remembered Margaret, another nanny from the network of women who moved through Chicago's wealthy homes like ghosts, caring for other people's children while their own waited at home. Margaret's voice carried an urgency that made Destiny's stomach clench. "The Williamses called the agency," Margaret continued. "They're asking questions about you. Background checks, references, the works. Destiny, honey, I think something's wrong." The words hit like ice water. Destiny's hand instinctively moved to touch Grace's shoulder, grounding herself in the child's warm presence. "What kind of questions?" "They wanted to know about any incidents, any complaints, any reason you might have left previous positions. Mrs. Williams's sister has been calling around. She's been asking about your finances, your family situation, whether you've ever had access to valuables." The phone seemed to grow heavy in Destiny's hand. Victoria Williams Hartford. Charles's imperious sister-in-law had never hidden her disdain for the hired help. She swept through the house during her monthly visits like a cold wind, her designer heels clicking judgment across marble floors, her pale eyes cataloging perceived flaws. "I haven't done anything wrong," Destiny whispered, but even as she said it, she felt the familiar fear that had plagued her since childhood, the terror of being blamed for things beyond her control. That evening, after the children were in bed, Destiny stood in the mansion's library, dusting shelves that held first editions worth more than most people's cars. The room smelled of leather and old paper, of old money and older secrets. Her hands moved automatically across book spines, while her mind raced through possibilities, each more frightening than the last. She thought of Micah, now 17 and working part-time at a community center while finishing high school. His college applications sat on their kitchen table at home, dreams written in careful handwriting on pages that required tuition payments she couldn't imagine making. This job wasn't just her livelihood. It was his future. The sound of the front door opening made her freeze. Charles was home early, his footsteps echoing through the foyer with unusual heaviness. He appeared in the library doorway moments later, his expensive suit wrinkled, his usually perfect hair disheveled. "Destiny, we need to talk." The words every domestic worker dreaded. Her hand stilled on the book she was holding, a volume of poetry that had belonged to his late wife, Sarah. How many evenings had she watched Sarah read from this very book to the children, her voice soft with love and approaching death? "Of course, Mr. Williams." Destiny set down her dustcloth, smoothing her hands over her simple black dress. Even in her fear, she maintained the dignity her mother had taught her. Spine straight, chin up, eyes steady. Charles moved to the massive mahogany desk, not sitting but leaning against its edge. The gesture made him seem smaller somehow, less sure of his authority. "Victoria has brought some concerns to my attention about missing items from the house." The room seemed to tilt. "Missing items?" "Sarah's diamond bracelet, the one from her jewelry drawer upstairs, and there's been money missing from the petty cash drawer in my office." His voice carried no warmth, no hint of the man who had once thanked her for saving Liam during his bout with pneumonia last winter. Destiny felt her knees weaken, but she forced herself to remain standing. "Mr. Williams, I would never—" "I'm not accusing you directly," he continued, though his tone suggested otherwise. "But you have access to all areas of the house, you know where things are kept, and frankly, I don't know you as well as I thought I did." The words struck like physical blows. 3 years of feeding his children, of singing them to sleep, of being their constant comfort and protection, and he didn't know her at all. To him, she was still just a stranger in his home, despite the countless ways she had woven herself into the fabric of his family's daily life. "I understand you have a son," Charles pressed on. "College is expensive. There might have been temptations." The implication hung in the air like poison gas. That she would steal from the children she loved to pay for her son's education, that her poverty made her inherently untrustworthy, that her love for this family was somehow tainted by her financial desperation. "Mr. Williams," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the trembling in her chest, "I have never taken anything from this house except the wages you pay me. I would never betray your trust or the children's." But even as she spoke, she saw doubt hardening in his eyes. Recent conversations with Victoria had clearly planted seeds that were now blooming into full suspicion. The rich sister-in-law who had never worked a day in her life, who had inherited her wealth and married into more, who saw people like Destiny as inherently suspect. "I've already called the agency," Charles said. "They're sending someone else tomorrow. I think it's best if you finish out the week and then find other arrangements." The dismissal was delivered with the same casual tone he might use to cancel a dinner reservation. 3 years of her life, of her love, of her devotion to his children, reduced to a business transaction that was now being terminated. Destiny wanted to argue, to demand proof, to fight for her reputation and her job. But the words died in her throat. She had seen this before, in other houses, with other families. When doubt crept in, when suspicion took root, there was no defense for someone in her position. Her word against theirs, her truth against their assumptions. The outcome was always predetermined. "May I say goodbye to the children?" she asked. Charles hesitated, and in that pause, she saw the depth of his suspicion. He actually believed she might harm them, these children she had loved more fiercely than their own father ever could. "I think it's better if you don't upset them," he said finally. "We'll explain that you found another position." Another lie to protect his comfort, to avoid difficult conversations with children who would be devastated by her unexplained absence. Grace would cry herself to sleep, wondering why Miss Destiny had left without saying goodbye. Liam would retreat further into himself, another abandonment added to his collection of adult disappointments. That night, Destiny packed her few personal items from the small staff room where she kept emergency supplies: a change of clothes, her worn Bible, a photo of Micah at his high school graduation rehearsal. Such a small collection of belongings to represent 3 years of her life. As she folded her spare uniform, she heard soft footsteps in the hallway. Grace appeared in her nightgown, rubbing sleepy eyes. "Miss Destiny? I had another nightmare. Can you sing to me?" Destiny's heart cracked open. She knelt and pulled the little girl close, breathing in her familiar scent of lavender soap and childhood innocence. "Of course, baby girl." She sang the lullaby her own mother had crooned to her in Spanish, the words carrying across generations of love and loss. Grace's breathing gradually steadied, her small body relaxing against Destiny's chest. "Will you be here when I wake up?" Grace whispered. Destiny closed her eyes, memorizing this moment, the weight of the child in her arms, the trust in her sleepy voice, the absolute faith that the adults in her life would keep their promises. "I'll always be in your heart," she whispered back, the only truth she could offer. The next morning, Destiny left the Williams mansion before dawn, carrying her single bag and a heart full of grief. She walked to the bus stop in the pre-dawn darkness, past the security gates and manicured lawns that had been her world for 3 years. Behind her, 2 children slept peacefully, unaware that the woman who had been their anchor was disappearing from their lives like morning mist. On the bus ride home to Pilsen, surrounded by other early morning workers heading to jobs that paid by the hour, Destiny allowed herself to cry. Not for the lost salary or the damaged reputation, but for Grace and Liam, who would wake to find that another adult they loved had vanished without explanation. In a house full of wealth, they were about to discover a poverty that no amount of money could fill: the absence of unconditional love. The weeks that followed blurred together in a haze of rejection and desperation. Destiny sat in agency waiting rooms, filling out applications that asked increasingly invasive questions about her departure from the Williams house. Word traveled fast in the tight network of Chicago's wealthy families. A whisper here, a concerned phone call there, and suddenly her 17 years of spotless service meant nothing against the shadow of suspicion. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Martinez," became the phrase she heard most often. "We're looking for someone with more recent references." Or, "The family has decided to go in a different direction." The polite dismissals that meant the same thing: "You've been marked as untrustworthy, and that stain doesn't wash out easily." Her savings, never substantial to begin with, dwindled quickly. The part-time cleaning job she managed to find paid a fraction of her nanny salary, and they came without the benefits or steady hours she had grown accustomed to. She found herself choosing between groceries and utilities, between bus fare and Micah's school supplies. Micah, to his credit, never complained. He took on more hours at the community center, his college applications pushed aside as he focused on helping support their small household. She watched him grow older before his time, just as she had at his age, and the parallel broke her heart. "Mia, the acceptance letters will still be there next year," she told him one evening as they shared a dinner of rice and beans stretched thin. "Dreams don't expire." But they both knew that wasn't entirely true. Scholarships had deadlines. Financial aid packages got redistributed. The window for changing your life sometimes closed while you were busy trying to survive. The worst part was the silence from the Williams house. No word about Grace and Liam, no updates on how they were adjusting to their new nanny. Destiny found herself walking past their school sometimes, hoping for a glimpse of them. But the private academy was fortress-like in its exclusivity. She imagined Grace asking when Miss Destiny would visit, Liam growing quieter as he learned not to expect explanations for adult cruelty. On a particularly difficult Tuesday in May, when the rent notice had turned yellow with age and her phone had been shut off for non-payment, Destiny sat in St. Augustine Church in Pilsen. The afternoon light filtered through stained glass windows, painting rainbow patterns on worn wooden pews. This was where she came when the weight of the world pressed too heavily on her shoulders, where she could speak to God in the Spanish of her childhood and feel heard. "I don't understand," she whispered to the empty sanctuary. "I gave them everything. I loved those children like my own. How did love become theft in their eyes?" The silence that answered her held no judgment, only the patient acceptance that had carried her through other dark periods. She thought of Elena, the daughter she had lost so many years ago, and wondered if love was always meant to be this painful, so intense it burned, so precious it was inevitably snatched away. An elderly woman entered the church, moving slowly with the careful steps of someone whose bones remembered younger days. She genuflected before sliding into the pew beside Destiny, her arthritic fingers working over worn rosary beads. "Mija," the woman said softly in Spanish. "Troubles?" Destiny nodded, not trusting her voice. There was something about the woman's kind eyes, the way she waited without rushing, that invited confession. "I cared for children who weren't mine," Destiny replied in Spanish, the language feeling more honest somehow. "I loved them as if they were, but love wasn't enough to protect me when they needed someone to blame." The old woman nodded knowingly. "Ah, see, the rich. They think their money makes us dishonest. They forget that we feed their children, teach them to walk, dry their tears. We are invisible until they need someone to disappear." The understanding in her voice was like balm on a wound. Here was someone who knew, who had lived the peculiar heartbreak of loving other people's families while your own waited at home. "But the children remember," the woman continued, her voice carrying the certainty of experience. "Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but love leaves marks on the soul. They will remember who held them when they cried." As spring turned to summer, that prediction seemed increasingly unlikely. Destiny had found steadier work cleaning office buildings at night, her days free but her body exhausted from the physical demands. She moved through gleaming corporate spaces in the dark hours, dusting desks where million-dollar deals were negotiated, emptying wastebaskets filled with decisions that could change lives. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was still caring for the spaces owned by the wealthy, but now she was completely invisible, a phantom who cleaned up their messes while they slept in suburban comfort. One humid August evening, as she was leaving the Sears Tower after her shift, she saw a familiar figure across the street. Charles Williams, looking older than his 45 years, stood outside a Starbucks checking his phone. Their eyes met across the traffic and pedestrians, a moment of recognition that hit like lightning. He started toward her, dodging cars with the determined stride of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. Destiny felt the urge to run, to disappear into the crowd before this encounter could happen, but something, pride, curiosity, or simple exhaustion, rooted her feet to the sidewalk. "Destiny," he said when he reached her, slightly out of breath. "I've been looking for you." The words that would have meant everything to her months ago now landed like stones. Too little, too late. She studied his face, noting the new lines around his eyes, the way his expensive suit hung a little loose on his frame. "Mr. Williams," she replied neutrally, offering no warmth, no invitation to continue. "We need to talk," he said, "about what happened, about the children." The mention of Grace and Liam sent pain shooting through her chest. "How are they?" "They miss you," he admitted, the words seeming to cost him something. "Grace still asks when you're coming back. She cries at night sometimes. And Liam, he's been having problems at school, acting out, getting in fights." Each word was a knife turning in her heart. She had known this would happen, had tried to warn him that children need consistency, need love that doesn't disappear without explanation. But he had chosen suspicion over trust, prejudice over the evidence of her devotion. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said carefully. "I hope the new nanny is working out well." Charles ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she remembered from the few times she had seen him vulnerable. "We've been through 4 nannies since you left. None of them connected with the children the way you did." The admission hung between them like an indictment. He had destroyed something precious in his haste to blame her, and now he was learning the cost of that choice. "Destiny," he continued. "I found the bracelet. It had fallen behind Sarah's dresser, and the money from my office. It was Victoria. She was taking it to pay her gambling debts. I should have investigated before I made assumptions." The apology she had dreamed of hearing now felt hollow, inadequate. Months of struggle, of poverty, of watching her son postpone his dreams. None of that could be undone with a simple admission of error. "I see," she said quietly. "I want to make this right," Charles pressed on. "I want you to come back. The children need you. I can double your salary, provide better benefits. We can put this all behind us." He was offering her everything she had lost, everything she needed to rebuild their life. Financial security for herself and Micah, the chance to return to Grace and Liam, to heal the wounds that her abrupt departure had left in their young hearts. But as she looked at this man who had so casually discarded her, who had believed the worst about her without a moment's hesitation, Destiny realized that some things, once broken, could never be fully repaired. Trust was like china. You could glue the pieces back together, but the cracks would always show. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Williams," she said finally, "but I think it's best if I don't come back." Surprise flickered across his features. Clearly, he had expected gratitude, eager acceptance of his belated recognition of her worth. The idea that she might refuse his charity had never occurred to him. "The children need you," he repeated, playing what he thought was his strongest card. "The children need consistency," Destiny replied softly. "They need adults who believe in them, who trust the people they invite into their lives. I'm not that person in your eyes, Mr. Williams. I never was, and I never could be." She turned to go, but his voice stopped her. "Destiny, please, I made a mistake. Can't we move past this?" She looked back at him, standing there in his $1,000 suit, surrounded by the gleaming symbols of his success. For just a moment, she saw past his wealth to the frightened father underneath, the man who had loved his wife and lost her, who was struggling to raise children in a world that valued money more than connection. "Some mistakes cost more than money can fix," she said gently. "I forgive you, Mr. Williams. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean pretending things can go back to how they were." As she walked away, disappearing into the evening crowds, Destiny felt something she hadn't experienced in months, a sense of her own dignity restored. She had loved the Williams family completely, had given them everything she had. Their inability to see her worth, to value her devotion, was their loss, not hers. The summer heat pressed down on Chicago like a heavy blanket, but for the first time since March, Destiny walked with her shoulders straight and her head high. She was worth more than their belated recognition, more than their guilty consciences and inadequate apologies. She was worth the truth. The years that followed taught Destiny that healing doesn't follow a straight line. Some days, the pain of losing Grace and Liam felt as fresh as an open wound. She would catch herself buying children's books at garage sales, imagining herself reading them aloud to small voices that would never hear them. Other days brought a strange kind of peace, the knowledge that she had loved completely and without reservation, regardless of the cost. Micah flourished at the community center in ways that surprised them both. His natural leadership and empathy, qualities that had been nurtured by watching his mother care for others, made him a beacon for younger kids who came from broken homes and uncertain circumstances. The college applications that had gathered dust were eventually replaced by something more immediate and vital, the realization that his purpose might lie in his own neighborhood, among people who understood struggle. "I want to get my social work degree," he told her one evening in their small kitchen. His acceptance letter to Northwestern Community College spread on the table between them. Work with families, maybe. Help kids who are caught between worlds like we were. Destiny looked at her son, now 18, tall and serious, with eyes that held both her gentleness and a strength that was entirely his own, and felt a pride that had nothing to do with money or status. This young man, whose dreams had been deferred by his mother's disgrace, had found a way to transform that pain into purpose. "Your father would be proud," she said softly, touching the silver cross at her throat that had been his last gift to her. The community center where Micah worked became a second home for Destiny as well. She began volunteering in the after-school program, helping elementary students with homework and reading. The children there came from families like hers, working poor, immigrant, forgotten by systems that claimed to protect them. They saw nothing strange in her accented English or her bargain store clothes. They simply saw someone who listened, who cared, who never made them feel small. One September afternoon, as she was helping 7-year-old Maria sound out difficult words in a picture book, the center's director approached her desk. "Destiny, there's someone here to see you," Carmen Rodriguez said, her face carefully neutral. "He says he knows you from a previous job." Destiny's heart clenched automatically. After 3 years, she still felt a stab of panic whenever her past as a nanny was mentioned, the fear that somehow the whispers and suspicions would follow her even here, contaminating this safe space she had built for herself. She looked up to see Liam Williams standing in the doorway, no longer the 10-year-old boy she remembered, but a young man of 13, tall and lanky with the awkward grace of early adolescence. His dark hair had lightened to brown, and his eyes, still so much like his father's, held a gravity that seemed too old for his years. "Miss Destiny." His voice cracked slightly on her name, betraying the emotion he was trying to control. Maria looked between them curiously, clearly sensing the weight of this moment. Destiny set down the book with hands that she hoped weren't shaking. "Liam," she said softly, "my goodness, look how you've grown." He stood there uncertainly, this child she had once comforted through nightmares and celebrated with over good report cards. The familiar urge to rush to him, to wrap him in the kind of hug she had given him 1,000 times before, warred with the reality of their changed circumstances. "I've been looking for you," he said finally. "Dad told me what really happened. About the bracelet, about Aunt Victoria, about why you really left." The words hung in the air between them, carrying 3 years of unanswered questions and misunderstood truths. Destiny felt the attention of the other children and volunteers in the room, the weight of curious eyes on this unexpected reunion. "Would you like to take a walk?" she asked gently. They stepped outside into the late afternoon sunlight, walking slowly along the sidewalk that bordered the center's small playground. Children's laughter echoed from the basketball court where Micah was running a pickup game with teenagers from the neighborhood. "I never stopped thinking about you," Liam said as they found a bench in the shade. "Even when Dad said you had gotten another job, it didn't feel right. You wouldn't have left without saying goodbye." "Not you." The simple faith in his words brought tears to her eyes. This boy, now becoming a man, had known her heart better than his father ever had. "I wanted to say goodbye," she admitted. "I asked your father if I could, but he thought it would be too upsetting." Liam's jaw tightened, and she could see the anger he was struggling to contain. "Grace cried for weeks. She kept asking when you were coming back. She thought it was her fault somehow. That she had done something wrong." The image of Grace blaming herself for an adult's cruelty was like a physical pain. Destiny's hands clenched in her lap, fighting the urge to demand that Charles bring Grace to see her immediately, to let her explain and comfort and heal the wounds that should never have been inflicted. "And you?" she asked softly. "How did you handle it?" Liam was quiet for a long moment, watching Micah coach a younger boy through a difficult shot. "I got angry," he said finally, "really angry. At Dad, at the new nannies, at everyone who wasn't you. I kept thinking that if I was bad enough, difficult enough, maybe they'd bring you back." The strategy of a child trying to control an uncontrollable situation, acting out in the only way he knew how. Destiny's heart ached for the confusion and helplessness he must have felt. "I'm sorry you went through that," she said. "You deserved better from all the adults in your life." "Dad knows that now," Liam replied. "He's been different since he found out the truth. More present, I guess. He still works too much, but he tries harder. And he fired Aunt Victoria from managing our trust funds." The mention of Victoria brought a small, satisfying surge of justice. The woman who had poisoned Charles against her, who had used her own theft to frame someone else, had finally faced consequences for her actions. "But Grace still asks about you," Liam continued. "She's 10 now, and she draws pictures of you sometimes. She makes up stories about where you went, what you're doing. Some of them are pretty funny. Actually." Destiny smiled despite her tears. "Like what?" "Last week she decided you had become a secret agent, but instead of fighting bad guys, you were finding lost children and bringing them home to their families." Liam's own smile was watery. "She said you were probably somewhere making sad kids happy because that's what you do." The child's imagination had created a truth more accurate than she could have known. Here at the community center, Destiny was indeed finding lost children, kids who felt forgotten, overlooked, unworthy of attention. She was bringing them home to themselves, to a sense of their own worth and possibility. "She's not wrong," Destiny said quietly. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the neighborhood come alive around them. Street vendors pushed carts filled with elote and raspados, their calls mixing with the sounds of music from open windows and children playing in front yards. This was Destiny's world now, far from marble floors and crystal chandeliers, but rich with the kind of authentic community she had always craved. "I graduate high school next year," Liam said eventually. "I want to study marine biology, maybe become a researcher. I still remember all those nature documentaries we used to watch together." The memory hit her like a wave. Sunday afternoons when Charles was at the office, curled up on the massive sectional sofa with both children, learning about coral reefs and deep-sea creatures. She had loved those quiet moments almost as much as the children had. "That's wonderful," she said, meaning it completely. "You'll be amazing at whatever you choose to do." "I want you to be there," Liam said suddenly. "At graduation, I mean. I know it might be weird, and I don't know if Dad would be okay with it, but you're part of why I made it this far. You should be there." The invitation was like a gift she hadn't known she needed, to be acknowledged, to be included in the celebration of this young man she had helped raise. It was more than she had dared to hope for. "I would be honored," she said simply. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Liam stood to leave. The hug he gave her was fierce and grateful, the embrace of someone who finally understood the depth of love he had been given and the cruelty of how it had been dismissed. "Thank you," he whispered against her shoulder, "for everything. For loving us when no one else knew how." After he left, Destiny sat on the bench until full darkness fell, processing the emotions that had been stirred up by his visit. The grief was still there, for the years she had missed, for Grace growing up without her presence, for the family bond that had been severed so brutally. But alongside the sadness was something else, a quiet vindication, the knowledge that love, once genuine, never truly disappears. The children had remembered. Despite their father's assumptions, despite the parade of replacement nannies, despite the years of silence, they had carried her love with them. And now, in their own time and their own way, they were finding their way back to her. Not as the woman who had once cared for them in a mansion on the Gold Coast, but as someone who mattered. Someone whose love had shaped them in ways their father was only beginning to understand. That night, Destiny called Micah into the kitchen and told him about Liam's visit. Her son listened with the careful attention she remembered from his childhood, when he had absorbed every word she spoke like precious wisdom. "So you're going to the graduation?" he asked when she finished. "I think I am," she said, still amazed by the invitation. Micah smiled, and in that expression, she saw approval and pride. "Good," he said firmly. It's about time they recognized what they lost. The graduation ceremony took place on a perfect May morning, when spring had finally conquered Chicago's stubborn winter, and the city felt alive with possibility. Destiny dressed carefully in her best black dress, not the expensive designer clothing she might once have worn to such an event, but clean and pressed, chosen with dignity rather than wealth in mind. The private academy where Liam attended was everything she remembered from her visits during her time with the family. Manicured lawns, Gothic architecture, and an air of privilege that seemed to emanate from the very stones. She felt conspicuous walking among the families arriving in luxury cars, her own presence made possible only by the bus route that connected their two worlds. But when she saw Liam searching the crowd, his face lighting up when he spotted her, none of that mattered. She was here because she'd been invited by someone who valued her presence, not because she belonged to a certain economic class or social circle. Charles Williams stood with Grace, now 10 and beautiful, with her mother's delicate features but livelier eyes, near the front of the gathering. When his gaze met Destiny's across the crowd, she saw a complex mixture of emotions: embarrassment, regret, and something that might have been gratitude. Grace saw her a moment later, and the child's reaction was everything Destiny had hoped for and feared: pure joy, unfiltered by the years of separation or the complex adult emotions that had caused it. Grace broke free from her father's restraining hand and ran through the crowd, her sundress flying behind her like butterfly wings. "Miss Destiny! Miss Destiny!" The name that had once been spoken in whispers was now shouted with delight. "You came! Liam said you would, but I wasn't sure." The hug Grace gave her was fierce and desperate, the embrace of a child who had never stopped hoping for this reunion. Destiny held her tight, breathing in the scent that was familiar but changed. No longer the strawberry shampoo of a 7-year-old, but something more grown up, more complex. "Of course I came," Destiny murmured against Grace's hair. "I wouldn't miss Liam's big day." "I missed you so much," Grace whispered, her voice thick with tears she was trying not to shed. "I wrote you letters, but Daddy said he didn't know where to send them." The admission was like a dagger to Destiny's heart. Letters from Grace, expressions of love and longing from the child she had considered her own, lost because Charles had chosen to sever all connections rather than explain his mistake. "I missed you too, sweet girl," Destiny said honestly, "every single day." Charles approached slowly, Grace's hand now firmly in his, as if he feared she might disappear again. Up close, he looked older than his 51 years, his face lined with what Destiny recognized as the weight of his mistakes. "Destiny," he said quietly, "thank you for coming. It means a great deal to Liam." "It means a great deal to me as well," she replied, her voice carefully neutral. She had forgiven Charles Williams in her heart, but forgiveness didn't erase the memory of how easily he had discarded her. The ceremony itself was a blur of speeches and accolades, but Destiny found herself focused on Liam's face as he crossed the stage to receive his diploma. The pride she felt was maternal in its intensity. This young man who had struggled through the trauma of losing her, who had acted out and fought his way through grief, who had emerged stronger and more determined than ever. When his name was called, she applauded with the fierce joy of someone who had earned the right to celebrate him, not through biology or wealth or social position, but through love. Through the nights she had sat up with him during his childhood illnesses, through the homework sessions and bedtime stories, through the 1,000 small acts of care that had helped shape him into the person standing on that stage. After the ceremony, the Williams family approached her again. This time, Charles's demeanor was different, less defensive, more openly humble. "Would you join us for lunch?" he asked. "There's a restaurant nearby. It would mean a lot to the children." The invitation surprised her. She had expected to exchange pleasantries and then fade back into her separate life, carrying the satisfaction of having been present for Liam's achievement. The idea of sharing a meal, of prolonging this reunion, was both appealing and frightening. "I don't want to intrude on your family celebration," she said carefully. "You wouldn't be intruding," Liam said firmly. "Your family too, you always were." The simple statement, delivered with the certainty of absolute truth, silenced whatever objections destiny might have raised. In the eyes of these children she had loved and lost, she had never stopped being family. The adults around them might have failed to recognize that bond, but the children themselves had never forgotten. The restaurant Charles had chosen was elegant but warm, the kind of place where conversations could happen without the stiffness of formal dining. As they settled around a table by the window, Destiny found herself studying the people Grace and Liam had become in her absence. Grace was chatty and animated, full of stories about school and friends and the various activities that filled her privileged childhood. But underneath the surface chatter, Destiny could see traces of the sensitive, anxious child she had once comforted. The way Grace's eyes flickered to Destiny periodically, as if checking to make sure she was still there. The unconscious way she reached out to touch Destiny's hand during conversation, as if grounding herself in physical contact. Liam was more reserved, but equally attentive, watching Destiny with the careful observation she remembered from his younger years. He had always been the more serious child, the one who absorbed everything and processed it internally. Now, at 18, he carried himself with a maturity that spoke of hard-won wisdom. "Tell us what you've been doing," Grace demanded over dessert. "All these years, what have you been up to?" Destiny found herself sharing stories from the community center, describing the children she worked with, the families she had come to know. She spoke about Micah's success in social work school, his dreams of making a difference in his community. She painted a picture of a life that was smaller in financial terms than what the Williams family knew, but rich in connection and purpose. "It sounds wonderful," Grace said wistfully, "like you're still taking care of children, just different ones." "In a way, yes," Destiny agreed. "I suppose that's what I'm called to do." Charles had been largely quiet during the meal, letting his children drive the conversation. But as the afternoon wore on, Destiny could see him struggling with something, building up the courage to say words that clearly didn't come easily to him. "Destiny," he said finally, his voice careful and measured, "I need to apologize to you, not just for the accusations, but for how I handled the whole situation. I should have trusted you. You had earned that trust, and I failed to give it to you." The apology was more complete than the one he had offered on the street corner years earlier, but Destiny found that it still couldn't undo the damage that had been done. Some wounds heal, but they leave scars that never fully disappear. "I appreciate that, Charles," she said quietly, using his first name deliberately. They were no longer employer and employee. Whatever they were, now required different terms. "But the apology I really need isn't for me. It's for your children, who lost someone they loved because you were too quick to believe the worst about someone who had given you no reason to doubt her." The direct challenge hung in the air between them. Grace and Liam watched this adult conversation with the intensity of people who understood that their own pain was finally being acknowledged. Charles looked at his children, then back at Destiny, and she could see the moment when his defenses finally crumbled completely. "You're right," he said simply. "Grace, Liam, I'm sorry. I made a terrible mistake, and you both paid the price for it. Destiny never deserved what happened to her, and you never deserved to lose her." It was Grace who broke the silence that followed, reaching across the table to take both her father's hand and Destiny's in her small ones. "Can we be a family again?" she asked, her voice small and hopeful. "Different than before, but still a family." The question was impossible to answer simply. Too much had happened, too much time had passed. The easy intimacy of Destiny's relationship with these children couldn't be restored with a single conversation or apology. Trust, once broken, had to be rebuilt slowly and carefully. But looking at Grace's hopeful face, at Liam's quiet longing, at Charles's genuine remorse, Destiny felt something shift inside her chest. Not forgiveness, she'd already given that. Not forgetting, that was neither possible nor necessary. But something like acceptance, like the possibility of a new beginning built on the foundation of what had come before. "We can try," she said softly. "We can see what kind of family we might become." It was a beginning, tentative and fragile, but real. As they left the restaurant and prepared to part ways, Liam hugged her with the easy affection of their old relationship, while Grace extracted promises of phone calls and visits. Charles lingered after his children had said their goodbyes, his hands shoved deep in his pockets in a gesture that reminded Destiny of the uncertain boy he must once have been. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I never found another nanny who loved them the way you did. I went through dozens of candidates, women with impressive credentials and glowing references, but none of them saw Grace and Liam as anything more than a job. You saw them as children who deserved love." "That's what they were," Destiny replied simply. "What they still are." "I know that now," Charles admitted. "I'm trying to do better, to be the father they deserve, not just the provider I thought was enough." It was progress, Destiny supposed, painful and slow, but progress nonetheless. As they parted ways that afternoon, Charles and the children heading back to their world of privilege and comfort, Destiny taking the bus back to Pilsen, she felt a strange sense of completeness. Not the restoration of what had been, but the acknowledgement of what had always been true. Love, once genuine, never really ends. It might be denied, suppressed, or ignored, but it endures. The years that followed brought gradual healing and the slow rebuilding of trust. Phone calls became regular occurrences, with Grace chattering about school and friends while Liam shared his college plans and dreams. Invitations to important events, Grace's middle school graduation, Liam's acceptance to Northwestern University, arrived with increasing frequency. The relationship was different now, more equal somehow. Destiny was no longer the employee grateful for any scrap of attention from her employers. She was a woman who had built a meaningful life of her own, someone whose presence was valued rather than taken for granted. Charles, to his credit, seemed to understand this shift. He treated her with a respect that had been missing during their previous relationship, consulting her opinion on decisions affecting the children and deferring to her judgment in matters where her knowledge exceeded his own. The most profound change was in the children themselves. Grace, now in high school, had developed into a thoughtful, empathetic young woman who volunteered at the very community center where Destiny worked. She brought the same fierce love that had once clung to Destiny into her work with younger children, creating a bridge between the world she came from and the world where love was measured in time and attention rather than dollars and gifts. Liam, pursuing his marine biology degree at Northwestern, had remained the serious, thoughtful person Destiny remembered, but with an added confidence that came from knowing his own worth. He spoke often of his plans to work in conservation, to use his privilege and education to protect the environment for future generations. "You taught me that love means taking care of things," he told Destiny during one of their regular coffee meetings. "The way you took care of us, even when it wasn't appreciated. That's what I want to do with the oceans, with marine life. Take care of things that can't take care of themselves." It was moments like these that convinced Destiny that her years with the Williams family had not been wasted, despite the pain and injustice that had marked their ending. The love she had given had taken root and grown, shaping these young people into adults who understood the value of service, of caring for those who were vulnerable. The vindication came not through grand gestures or public acknowledgments, but through these quiet recognitions of her influence. These moments when the children she had raised demonstrated the values she had tried to instill in them. And perhaps that was enough. Perhaps that was more than enough. On a crisp October evening, as autumn painted Chicago in shades of gold and crimson, Destiny received an unexpected phone call from Charles Williams. His voice carried an excitement that surprised her, a youthful energy she hadn't heard from him in all the years she had known him. "Destiny, I have something I want to discuss with you," he said without preamble. "Are you free for dinner tomorrow evening?" The invitation puzzled her. Their interactions had settled into a comfortable routine of family gatherings and important milestones. Middle-of-the-week dinner invitations were unprecedented. "Is everything all right?" she asked. Is something wrong with Grace or Liam? No, no, nothing like that, Charles assured her quickly. In fact, everything is wonderful, but I have a proposal I want to discuss with you, and it's something that requires privacy. The next evening found Destiny in an upscale restaurant in downtown Chicago, the kind of place where she would once have felt intimidated by the elegant decor and expensive wine list. Now, dressed in her best outfit, still simple but chosen with confidence rather than anxiety, she felt only curiosity about what Charles might have to say. He was already seated when she arrived, turning over what appeared to be a formal document in his hands. His face held the expression of someone who was both excited and nervous, like a child with a secret he was bursting to share. "Thank you for coming," he said as she settled into her chair across from him. "I know this is mysterious, but I wanted to do this properly." Destiny accepted the menu from the server, but found herself studying Charles instead of the list of entrees. Something had changed in him over the past few years, some fundamental shift that went beyond mere regret for past mistakes. He seemed lighter somehow, more present in his own life. "Charles, what is this about?" she asked gently. He set down the document and looked directly at her, his expression serious but warm. "It's about recognition," he said simply. "About making things right, not just for the past, but for the future." He slid the document across the table to her. The letterhead at the top made her breath catch. Williams Family Foundation, established to provide educational opportunities for underserved children in the Chicago area. "I don't understand," she said, scanning the formal language of what appeared to be a foundation charter. "Keep reading," Charles encouraged. "Look at the section about the advisory board." Destiny's eyes moved down the page until they found her own name listed as the educational program director, with a salary figure that made her heart skip. But it was the paragraph below her title that brought tears to her eyes. "In recognition of Ms. Destiny Martinez's lifetime commitment to nurturing and educating children, and in acknowledgement of her profound influence on the Williams family, this position is offered with the full authority to design and implement programs that reflect her values of compassion, dignity, and educational excellence for all children, regardless of economic background." "Charles," she whispered, looking up at him through tears she didn't try to hide. "This is long overdue," he finished firmly. "Destiny, you spent years caring for my children, pouring love and wisdom into them that shaped who they became. You did that while struggling to provide for your own son, while living paycheck to paycheck, while being treated as less than family, despite doing more than family to hold us together." He leaned forward, his voice gaining intensity. "This foundation represents a significant portion of my assets, money that I would have spent on things that don't matter, investments that only make rich people richer. Instead, I wanted to do something meaningful. I wanted to create the kind of opportunities you would have designed if you'd had unlimited resources." Destiny stared at the document, unable to fully process what she was seeing. The salary alone would transform her and Micah's lives, providing security she had never dared to dream of. But beyond the money was something even more valuable: recognition of her worth, acknowledgement of her expertise, the power to shape programs that could help children like the ones she worked with every day. "The board meetings will be held at your convenience," Charles continued. "You'll have full autonomy over program design and implementation. The only requirement is that the programs reflect your philosophy of education, that every child deserves love, attention, and the chance to reach their potential." "I don't know what to say," Destiny admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Say yes," came a familiar voice from behind her. She turned to see Liam and Grace approaching their table, both beaming with excitement and pride. "Did you think we'd miss this?" Grace asked, bending down to hug Destiny from behind. "This was our idea originally. Well, mine and Liam's idea, Dad's execution." Liam took the seat beside his father, his mature face glowing with satisfaction. "We've been planning this for months," he said. "Ever since I started college and realized how much my success was built on the foundation you gave me. It felt wrong that you were still struggling financially while we had everything we needed and more. Grace nodded eagerly. And all those kids you work with at the community center, they deserve the same chances we had. Better chances, actually, because they'll have you designing their programs instead of some stranger who doesn't really know them. Destiny looked around the table at these three people who had once been her employers and charges, now offering her something she had never imagined possible: true partnership, real respect, and the resources to make a difference on a scale she had only dreamed of. "There's one more thing," Charles said, reaching into his jacket for another envelope. "This is separate from the foundation work, though related." Inside the envelope was a deed to a small house in Pilsen, not far from where she currently lived, but worlds better in terms of condition and space. "We bought it through the foundation," Charles explained. "Consider it part of your compensation package, but more than that, consider it a recognition that you deserve stability, security, a place that's truly yours." The house was modest by Williams' family standards, but to Destiny, who had spent decades paying rent on cramped apartments, who had worried about every utility bill and rent increase, it represented something beyond price: the security of belonging somewhere, of having a place that couldn't be taken away by someone else's whims or economic pressures. "I don't know if I can accept all this," she said, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they were offering. "It's too much." "It's not enough," Liam said firmly. "Miss Destiny, you gave us everything when we had nothing but money. Now we want to give you something back, not just money, but the chance to do what you're brilliant at on a scale that matches your heart." Grace nodded vigorously. "Besides, this way we get to work together again. I'm planning to major in education, maybe child development. I want to work for the foundation too. Learn from you properly this time." The conversation that followed stretched deep into the evening as they discussed program possibilities, target populations, and the kind of impact they hoped to make. Destiny found herself describing her vision for early childhood education, summer programs for at-risk youth, family support services that address the whole child rather than just academic needs. It was the kind of conversation she had never been able to have during her years as a nanny, the theoretical discussion of child development and educational philosophy that her experience had taught her, but her position had never allowed her to express. As the evening wound down and they prepared to leave, Charles asked one final question. "There's just one thing I need to know," he said. "After everything that happened, after the way I treated you, why are you willing to do this? Why are you willing to work with us again?" Destiny considered the question carefully. The hurt was still there, probably always would be. The memory of being dismissed, of having her love questioned and her integrity doubted, had left scars that would never completely disappear. But alongside that pain was something stronger: the knowledge that Grace and Liam had grown into remarkable young adults despite their father's mistakes, that they carried within them the values she had tried to instill, that they understood love as action rather than just emotion. "Because they remember," she said simply, looking at Grace and Liam. "Because love, once real, doesn't disappear. And because there are other children out there who need what I learned to give by loving yours." 6 months later, the Destiny Martinez Educational Center opened its doors in a renovated building in Pilsen. The center offered after-school tutoring, summer enrichment programs, parent education classes, and family support services, all designed with the holistic approach Destiny had developed through years of caring for children from all backgrounds. The opening ceremony was a blend of two worlds that had rarely intersected before. Wealthy donors from Charles Williams's social circle mingled with families from the community. Children who would benefit from the center's programs played alongside Grace and Liam Williams, and Destiny stood at the podium wearing a simple blue dress, the same color as the uniform she had once worn as a nanny. "This center exists because love is its own form of wealth," she said to the gathered crowd. "Every child who walks through these doors will be valued not for what their family owns, but for who they are and who they might become. They will be seen, heard, and loved because that's what children deserve. All children, everywhere." In the audience, Micah sat in the front row, now a licensed social worker himself, beaming with pride at his mother's achievement. Beside him, an elderly woman dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief, Mrs. Rodriguez from their church, who had known Destiny since she first arrived in Chicago as a young woman with a broken heart and fierce determination to build a better life. Charles Williams sat with Grace and Liam, watching the woman whose worth he had once failed to recognize command a room full of people who understood her value instinctively. The regret he felt was tempered by gratitude, not just for her willingness to work with his family again, but for her grace in transforming his guilt into something productive. As the ceremony concluded and guests toured the center's bright, welcoming spaces, Destiny found herself standing in what would be her office, looking out the window at the playground where children were already beginning to gather. The view was different from the one she had once had from the mansion's window. Instead of manicured lawns and security gates, she could see a neighborhood alive with the energy of families, street vendors, and children walking home from school. But the feeling was familiar, that sense of purpose that came from knowing she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do. Grace appeared in the doorway, now 17, and radiant with the confidence that came from knowing her place in the world. "Miss Destiny," she said, using the title that had once marked their difference in status but now carried only affection. "Thank you. For everything. For loving us when we were little. For forgiving Dad when he was stupid. For showing us what real service looks like." Destiny turned from the window and opened her arms, and Grace ran into them just as she had when she was 7 years old and afraid of nightmares. Some things, Destiny thought as she held this young woman she had helped raise, never changed. Love was love, wherever it found you, however it grew. "Thank you," she whispered back, "for remembering, for coming back, for letting me love you." The years that followed were filled with the kind of satisfaction that comes from work that feeds the soul as well as paying the bills. The Destiny Martinez Educational Center became a model for community-based programming, attracting visitors from other cities who wanted to replicate its success. But more than its reputation as an innovative program, it served as a daily reminder that love, once authentic, creates ripples that extend far beyond its original circle. Children who struggled in traditional school settings flourished in the center's nurturing environment. Parents who had felt helpless in the face of their children's challenges found support and practical resources. Teenagers who might have fallen through society's cracks discovered mentorship and opportunities that opened doors to futures they had never imagined. And at the heart of it all was Destiny, now in her early 50s, her hair completely silver, but her energy undiminished. She moved through the center's programs with the same gentle authority she had once brought to bedtime routines and homework sessions, but now her influence extended to dozens of families rather than just 2 children. The transformation in her own life was equally remarkable. The modest house in Pilsen had become a warm, welcoming space where children from the center were always welcome for extra help with homework or simply for the comfort of knowing that someone cared about their progress. Micah, now married and working as a family advocate, lived nearby with his own young son, bringing the circle of love full circle as Destiny became the grandmother she had always been meant to be. The relationship with the Williams family had settled into something unprecedented in Destiny's experience, genuine friendship based on mutual respect rather than economic necessity. Grace was now in college studying early childhood education, spending her summers working at the center and learning from the woman who had first taught her about love in action. Liam, completing his marine biology degree, often brought the children from the center on field trips to the aquarium, sharing his passion for ocean conservation with kids who had never seen water larger than a public pool. Charles had changed too. His success in business now balanced by a genuine commitment to philanthropy that went beyond tax write-offs and charity balls. He served on the center's board not as a wealthy patron, but as someone who understood that his resources were most valuable when guided by wisdom, born of love rather than spreadsheets. The vindication Destiny had once craved came not in a single moment of recognition, but in the daily evidence that her life's work mattered. Former students returned to volunteer at the center, successful now in careers in college, but still carrying the values they had learned in its programs. Parents thanked her for seeing potential in children that others had dismissed. Community leaders sought her input on policies affecting children and families. But perhaps the sweetest vindication came in quiet moments. Grace calling to share news about her education courses and asking for advice about working with difficult children. Liam sending photos from his research trips, accompanied by messages about how her guidance had shaped his understanding of his responsibility to use his privilege for good. Charles admitting in a private conversation that his greatest achievement wasn't his business success, but becoming the father his children deserved, largely because he had learned from watching how she loved them. On a warm evening in late spring, as Destiny locked up the center after a long day of programming, she found herself pausing to look back at the building that had become her legacy. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, children who needed extra attention, families facing crisis, community issues that required advocacy and action. But tonight, she felt something she had sought her entire adult life, the quiet satisfaction of knowing that her love had mattered, that her work had created lasting change, that the children who had once been dismissed as just a job had grown into adults who understood the power of love to transform lives. The bus ride home took her through neighborhoods that told the story of her Chicago, from the gleaming towers of the Gold Coast, where she had once worked as an invisible caretaker, through the bustling heart of the city where dreams were built on determination and hard work, to the community in Pilsen, where she had found her place in the world. At each stop, she saw families like the ones she served, parents working multiple jobs to provide for children they loved fiercely, elderly grandparents serving as caregivers and wisdom keepers, teenagers balancing responsibility and dreams in ways that would have amazed the wealthy families who assumed economic struggle meant moral failure. These were her people, and this was her calling, not as the nanny who had been discarded when suspicion arose, but as the educator and advocate who had transformed that pain into purpose, who had used her understanding of love's power to create opportunities for children who deserved every chance to succeed. As she walked the final blocks to her own home, Destiny reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The loss of her daughter Elena had broken her heart, but taught her about the precious nature of childhood. The years of caring for other people's children had shown her that love was not diminished by being shared, but multiplied. The betrayal by the Williams family had nearly destroyed her, but their eventual recognition had given her something more valuable than vindication, the resources to make her love matter on a scale she had never imagined. Her small house glowed with warm light as she approached. Through the front window, she could see Micah helping his 4-year-old son Diego with a puzzle at the kitchen table. The boy had his grandmother's eyes and his father's determined concentration, and watching him reminded Destiny of all the children who had passed through her care over the years. Some had been wealthy like Grace and Liam, others poor like the kids at the community center, but all had needed the same thing, to be seen, valued, and loved unconditionally. In a world that too often measured worth by bank accounts and zip codes, Destiny had learned to see the precious soul within every child, regardless of their circumstances. As she opened her front door and Diego ran to greet her with the enthusiasm that only grandchildren could muster, Destiny felt the familiar surge of love that had driven her entire adult life. This was what mattered, not the recognition or the awards, not the foundation or the programs, but this moment of pure connection between generations, this passing down of love from one heart to another. "Abuela," Diego called, wrapping his small arms around her legs, "I made you a picture at school today." The drawing he proudly displayed was typical 4-year-old art, stick figures and bright colors that somehow captured emotions that words couldn't express. In crayon strokes, he had drawn what appeared to be a woman surrounded by children, all holding hands in an endless circle. "That's you," Diego explained earnestly, pointing to the central figure. "And all the kids you take care of. Mrs. Carmen at the center told me you love lots of children, not just me." Destiny knelt to his level, studied the artwork with the seriousness it deserved. In his innocent way, Diego had captured the truth of her life's work, the expanding circle of love that connected all the children she had cared for, from the wealthy Williams children to the community center kids, to her own precious grandson. "It's beautiful, mijo," she said, kissing the top of his curly head. "And you're right. Love is like this picture. It just keeps growing bigger and bigger, connecting everyone together." That night, as she tucked Diego into bed in the room that had once been her lonely refuge from the world's harsh judgments, Destiny told him stories about all the children she had known. She spoke of Grace's artistic talent and Liam's love of sea creatures, of Maria's determination to read every book in the center's library, of Carlos's dreams of becoming a doctor to help his community. "Will I meet them someday?" Diego asked sleepily. "Some of them," Destiny promised. "And you'll meet new children too, children who need love just like all of us do. That's how the circle keeps growing." As Diego drifted off to sleep, Destiny stayed beside his bed for a few moments longer, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. In the quiet of the evening, she could almost feel the presence of all the children who had shaped her life. Elena, whose brief existence had broken her heart open to love. Grace and Liam, whose need for nurturing had taught her that family was created by choice, not blood. The countless children at the center who had shown her that her own struggles could become strength for others. And now, Diego, the newest link in a chain of love that stretched back generations and would continue long after she was gone. In him, she saw the future, a world where children were valued for who they were rather than what they had, where love was measured by depth rather than dollars, where the lessons she had learned through pain and sacrifice would be passed down as wisdom and hope. The phone rang softly from the kitchen, and Destiny rose to answer it, careful not to wake her sleeping grandson. The voice on the other end was Grace, now 22 and full of excitement about her first teaching position. "Miss Destiny, I got the job." Grace's voice bubbled with joy. "The principal said my interview was amazing because I talked about you, about everything you taught me about seeing each child as an individual, about love being the foundation of all learning. I start next month in a Title I school, working with kids who remind me so much of the ones at your center." Destiny smiled, settling into her favorite chair in the living room where family photos covered every surface. Diego's first steps, Micah's college graduation, the opening day of the center, and yes, pictures of Grace and Liam at various stages of their lives, because they were still family, would always be family. "I'm so proud of you, mija," Destiny said softly. "Those children are going to be so lucky to have you." "I hope I can be half the teacher you are," Grace replied. "Miss Destiny, I want you to know something. Dad and I were talking the other day about how different our lives might have been if you hadn't loved us the way you did. We could have grown up thinking wealth was more important than kindness, that being served was more valuable than serving others. But you showed us something different." The conversation continued for another hour, Grace sharing her hopes for her new students and her plans to implement some of the innovative programs she had observed at Destiny's Center. When they finally said goodbye, Destiny felt the deep satisfaction that came from knowing her influence would ripple forward through Grace's teaching, touching children she would never meet but whose lives would be enriched by lessons learned in love. Later that evening, as she prepared for bed in the house that was truly hers, Destiny looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back had silver hair and lined face, hands roughened by years of work, and a heart made both tender and strong by decades of loving other people's children. She had never become wealthy in material terms, had never achieved the kind of recognition that society typically values. But she had done something more important. She had loved without condition, served without expectation, and created a legacy that would outlast any bank account or business empire. Every child she had nurtured carried a piece of her love forward into the world. Every family she had served, from the Williams Mansion to the community center, had been changed by her presence. As she turned off the lights and settled into sleep, Destiny offered a prayer of gratitude for the journey that had brought her here. The pain had been real. The loss of Elena, the betrayal by the Williams family, the years of struggle and uncertainty. But so had the joy, the laughter of children, the satisfaction of watching them grow and succeed, the knowledge that her life had made a difference. Tomorrow would bring new challenges at the center, new children who needed love and guidance, new families seeking hope and support. There would be budget meetings and program evaluations, grant applications and community partnerships. But at the heart of it all would be the same truth that had sustained her throughout her adult life. Love was the most powerful force in the world, and everyone deserved to receive it. In her dreams that night, Destiny was surrounded by all the children she had ever loved, some now grown with children of their own, others still young and full of possibility, all connected by the invisible threads of affection and care that bound them together across time and circumstance. She was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do, loved by exactly the people who mattered most. And in a world that too often forgot the value of such quiet heroism, that was more than enough. That was everything. And you? Have you ever cared for someone who later forgot you? Have you ever loved like a mother while being called just the help? Have you ever been the silent strength that held a family together, only to be discarded when blame needed a target? Tell me your story in the comments below, because every woman who is loved without recognition, who is gave without expectation of thanks, deserves to know that her devotion mattered. If this story moved your heart, if it reminded you that love is never wasted even when it's not returned, please leave a like and subscribe to this channel. Share it with another woman who has been invisible in someone else's home, who has dried tears that weren't her own children's, who has been forgotten by families she helped to raise. Your story matters. Your love matters. And somewhere, somehow, the children you helped to shape remember the warmth of your hands, the sound of your voice, the safety of your love. To continue this journey of emotional stories that honor the forgotten women who hold families together, click on the podcast link to the left. We have more stories of resilience, recognition, and the quiet heroism of women whose love changes the world one child at a time. Thank you for walking this path with us, for believing that every act of love creates ripples that extend far beyond what we can see. Until we meet again in our next story, remember, you are seen, you are valued, and your love has made all the difference.